Welcome to another episode of Home Sweet Home. My name is Rod McCall.
And I'm Scott Nichols. So what are we doing today?
Well, okay. So, I know we're all over the place in the topics, but I wanted to hit on an issue. We've talked a little bit about it. Bryce and I did one. In fact, one of our early episodes was on divorce. And I was thinking maybe it'd be nice to go back and revisit that a little bit, especially with some research that I come across about the long-term impact and effect that divorce can have on kids. And I think you might be able to add some insight, being a child of divorce.
A little bit.
And you were kind enough to actually bring in another person that has some pretty good experience with divorce.
Probably a little bit more than me.
Yeah, would you like to introduce our guest today?
So yeah, Eileen and I have been married for almost 32 years now. So I wanted to bring Eileen in on it. She's got a different story than mine. My parents were divorced before I was born, and her parents were divorced much later in her life than that, but not so late as for her to be an adult. So, but I'll let her talk about that a little bit.
All right. Well, my parents were divorced when I was 14. I was just entering high school. That was when they were officially divorced. They were separated when I was 13. So yeah, it was pretty traumatic. My dad was pretty much left out of the picture. Not by his design. It really affected me. It affected me all the way up until his passing in February.
Okay. I mean, we get a lot of kids who in the classroom that are mom and dad are divorced. Sometimes mom and dad are divorced, and they're still single, or they're going through the process, or mom and dad are remarried. We get them. You're a school teacher, just like Scott and I are, and
probably better than we are. But,
well, that's a given. She teaches, she teaches elementary. Yeah, I substituted elementary for a little while. That was a long day.
And that was just the first hour.
Yeah, I've said it before, but I did kindergarten, and I tell you what, those kids told me that I was doing things wrong more often than my son's wife ever did. I mean, Mr. McCall, that's not how a teacher does it. Well, Mr. McCall, a teacher does it this way. I mean, they were sweet, wonderful kids, but God bless you. I'll stick to my high school kids. So anyway, well, would it be fair to say that for both of you, divorce had an impact on your life? Good, bad, doesn't matter, but it had an impact.
Well, I think everything that happens in your life causes some kind of an impact, right?
Okay.
I mean, my parents were divorced, roughly the time I was born. So did it have the same kind of impact? Probably not. I mean, I did kind of know my dad. My siblings were older. I had some older siblings that definitely went through similar things that Eileen probably went through. But for me, I don't see a major impact. By the time I really have memories, my mother already had another man in her life, and he was kind of, as a stepfather, he was really kind of my dad for all those years. So I don't think it had quite the same impact for me. Also, my mother was at home all the time. She worked from home. So, I mean, there was still a lot of kind of family support going on there. I mean, there's lots of craziness, right? There's lots of issues around that. But I don't think that for me that it was the same as certainly Eileen's experience.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that it did have an impact, not to disagree with you, honey, but...
But I'm going to disagree with you.
I think it did have an impact on Scott in a way, and maybe more positive than negative, in the fact that I know that he's mentioned it before in prior podcasts that we had made the decision early on in our dating experience that before we were married that when we got married, divorce wasn't going to be in our vocabulary. That we were not going to pass that down to our children.
Okay. I mean, okay. I should have clarified my statement that divorce, has an impact. Yes, it does. Sometimes it can be good. Sometimes it can be bad. And I think a lot depends on the situation, the issue. Sherry loves to say all the time, well, it depends. Every time I ask her a question, well, it depends. I think in this case, the issue of the impact of divorce on children depends. And I think a lot does have to do with the age. When my sister Deanna got married, they had 4 kids. And the age on the 4 kids I think from 16 to 1. Well, the 1-year-old, she didn't really have any memories, but the 16-year-old, he did. And I think each one of them processed the divorce absolutely differently as a consequence. So in the case, Scott, you being, pretty much an infant versus Eileen being 14, the impact and the consequences that it has, absolutely can be different. And so what I was thinking, maybe we could explore a little bit. Again, the impact of kids. So I'm going to ask you to go back a few years to when you were, 13 and 14. But I want to look at the impact at the time. And then we can kind of jump forward a little bit as well to, how you think that might influence your thought patterns today. But the areas I want to look at include the emotional impact, the behavioral impact or potential changes from before, during, and after, as well as any physical symptoms, because that also is something that pops up a lot, especially if there's a lot of trauma going on. And then, of course, we'll end with some of the long-term effects. I mean, you already hinted at what one of the long-term effects for the two of you has been, that we ain't getting a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is, so that's, kind of what we'll explore, because again, we see kids in the classroom, and I didn't understand it a long time ago, but I feel like now I truly do understand. School can sometimes be a safe haven for the kids.
Yeah.
And I mean, if mom and dad are married, but in a horrible relationship, a lot of fighting. Was there a lot of fighting, Eileen?
There wasn't a lot of fighting. It was a very out of the blue kind of situation.
From your perspective,
From
your
my
point of view.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So therefore, let's talk about how did that end? How did you feel about that? How did you learn, and how did you get told this, and how did you feel when this was told to you?
Well, I was about 12 years old when my mom told me about some issues between my father and her, and they were very personal and very inappropriate for a parent to be sharing with their child. And then, but nothing like, there was no fighting, there was no discord, it wasn't upsetting to be home. By the time I was 13, I noticed that, we had some issues happening around the house, and not like fighting or anything, but we had a family friend that came over and spent a little extra time, and I didn't really understand completely what was going on, and eventually it was just, they weren't going to be married anymore. There was no preparation, there was no, they didn't even sit me down and talk to me like you see on TV.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, I don't love him, he doesn't love me, we're just going to get divorced. And so I think the thing that when you talk about some of the emotional feelings that I had, I wanted them to be together, and I thought that this was going to blow over and they were going to get back together.
Okay.
For years, I thought that they would eventually get together.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of felt like my dad still loved my mom, but my mom didn't love my dad. And then there was this feeling of, well, if you can fall out of love with dad or you can fall out of love with mom, then, what about me? So being in high school, and I loved school. School has always been a place that I've loved. I've always thrived there. Probably why I'm a teacher. At about like 13, 14, well, probably around 12, but around 13 or 14 is when things started to become difficult as far as my eating. I became, I wasn't anorexic, but I was pretty darn close. I just controlled my eating it affects me now. Like it's a process that I fight. Just caloric intake, working out like crazy. Somehow, like, I think I thought that maybe if you were pretty enough, if you were skinny enough, then you could gain the love of someone and keep the love of someone.
Okay. I got kids today. Mom and dad aren't divorced, and they still feel that way. So I see that as pretty common. But to go through that, again, these are the kinds of things that I don't think that adults appreciate. When mom and dad get divorced, I question how much are you investing in the impact that has on the kids, on the children, because they kind of seem. I feel like they are the forgotten casualties. But what you explained, well, if they fell out of love, what about me? Will they not love me either? I've heard that many times as a legitimate concern. And did you ever feel that their separation was maybe your fault? And if you did things different, you might be able to bring them back together.
No, but there was this element where my mother had made it seem like it was my sister's fault.
Oh, okay.
So there was it's quite a
story. No, and that's I'm not asking you to go through that, but I mean, a lot of times kids do feel a ton of emotions from anxiety because what's going to happen next? What does mom and dad getting divorced look like? Will we have to move? You've got then the issues of like, okay, when we got divorced or separated, I was told over the phone, and I told Eric's mom. I said, well, we'll tell Eric when we're together, because it was over spring break of 2010, and I had gone to my mom and dad's to help out on the farm and just to have a little space between the two of us. Anyway, I had said, well, okay, I will be home on this day. I want to say it was like a Friday. And so I came home on Friday, and I was there late afternoon. I walked in the door, and her mom and dad were there from Kansas, and they were packing up all my stuff. And the first thing Eric says to me was, Daddy, please don't leave. Please don't move out. And my response was, how the hell do you know anything right now? Why are they packing up my stuff? Why has she already told him? And I was mad. But here he was confused. He was, feeling some, sadness. He was feeling, confusion of what's going on. And I hear that a lot. Did you feel anger at all?
I don't think I was really angry, but I was hurt. And I have to go back to the thing you said was that I think it was my fault. And I have to qualify that a little bit, because there was a period of time just before my parents actually officially went their separate ways. He was staying on the couch and she was staying in the bedroom for a period of time before he could find a place. And things got a little tense between the two of them. Never like fighting, like yelling and screaming, but it was tense enough that I said, I just want this over with. I just want peace again. And I said that to my mom. And then when they got divorced, she told me, well, you wanted it over with. A 14-year-old, that I guess I did feel a little bit responsible for the actual divorce part. But I didn't really feel responsible until years later. Like it didn't really seep in until like it was underlying. I was sad. I wasn't angry, but I was sad. And I just wanted my dad.
See, I think there's multiple factors that go into this, and one of them is timing, right?
Okay.
The timing in my case, it was when I was a baby, and in Eileen's case, it was in her teenage years, and for your son, it was preteen. And so timing is part of that, right? Because it just depends on how much the child is going to remember. But the second, and maybe even more important part of that, is the attitude and how the parents actually handle it. How the two people that are getting divorced are handling that in front of and with the child. For my parents, my mother didn't really say a lot about it, not to me anyway. Mm-hmm. So my older siblings might have been affected more, but I mean, I knew my father was around. He was, we knew where he lived. I mean, I could point it out today. And we just never really got together. I just didn't. As young as I was, he was kind of like a stranger to me. Mm-hmm. To my older siblings, they went over there more frequently, and I saw there was a little bit more tension between my mother and them with relation to my dad. But as you get older, that's an issue. But if the parents are handling it in a way that is causing them to kind of bring about some kind of anger, right? So show their anger, then that it starts to. I think that's when you get into these issues of, well, is the kid going to blame themselves, right? Are they going to see this argument as something that they caused, because maybe they caused other arguments before.
Yeah.
So depending on how the parents actually handle it is one thing, and then you have the parents who say, "Well, we're going to stay together just for the kids."
Yeah.
And then they fight like cats and dogs the entire time, and the parent and the kids are still affected by it, even though the divorce happens when their kids are adults.
Sure.
So. No matter where that timing is, there's going to be some effect, but I think the kind of effect, positive or negative, can be really impacted by the actions of the parents.
Well, and that's really, very true. I one of my things that I hang my hat on, a big issue that is of extreme concern to me, is this thing called parental alienation. And parental alienation, it's nothing new. It's been around. I mean, some of the original documentation of what we now know as parental alienation goes all the way back to the 1930s.
I gotta say, it might not be new, but it sure sounds new to me.
Well, I mean, it was coined by Dr. Richard Gardner back in the mid 80s. And, people are arguing, this, that, but it is real, and it's not, it's when, a parent will, usually during a divorce, will tell the kids, look, you got to love me and hate the other parent. Mm-hmm. And they really do a number. And I mean, when Charity and her husband got divorced, there was some hurt and anger between the two of them. And there was a little bit of alienation by both of them to make the kids kind of choose a side. I'm the good guy, the other parent's the rotten piece of garbage. But after a couple of months, it really died down as they discovered that, look, that's my hatred towards that person. The kids need to love the other parent and let that relationship develop according to the other parent, not according to my design. And so that usually fails. But what I went through with Eric and his mom was extreme alienation, where she literally tried to write me out of his life, tried to take away my parental rights, was even going so far as having her last name for him instead of my last name. And so, but I mean, so these are things that mom and dad can do, but it puts child in the middle. And we did an episode, I think one of our very first episodes that we did for Home Sweet Home was on the issue of divorce. And I talked to my nieces and nephews and other kids that I gotten to know pretty well. And I asked them, well, what are some things that you wish mom and dad would have done differently? That kids should know, parents should know. And one of the big issues was don't talk about the legal issues. I mean, because the emotional distress that puts on the children, they don't want to know. They don't care to know what the legal issues are. And again, I kept hearing this again and again, don't make me choose. I want to love mom and I want to love dad.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, this isn't a situation where, like the other things, you get 50% of the house and I get 50% of the house, and you get 50% of this and I get 50% of that, or you get 100% and I get nothing, or, the other way around. It doesn't have to be that, like, the love doesn't have to be divided, right? It's not a zero-sum game. If you love this person, then you have to hate the other one. No, you can love, the child can love both, right? But it's certainly going to be an issue if you're painting one person as the bad guy over the other, when it took two people to say I do.
But two of you to bring you into the world.
Yeah, and now it takes two to well, I guess it can only take one nowadays, right, to get out of it. But it's still two, right? Like you're coming to that conclusion because of actions of two people. Mm-hmm. And whatever that may be, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game for the child.
Well, that was one of the things too that was brought up when I interviewed all these different kids at divorce. They were saying, "Mom and Dad co-parent. I want both of you. I need both of you. So co-parent together." Eileen, how did that work for you?
It was good co-parenting. It was definitely I was mean to. There was a point where I asked at one point to live with my dad. Said something about living with my dad, and my mom said, "If you do that, then I am going to bring everything up that's ever happened, and I'm going to take your sister and your dad to court, and we're going to drag it all through the mud." And I'm like, "Okay." So, and nothing really happened. It was just a real messed up thing. And my mom, and so to put some parameters around this and to give you kind of an idea of how this all happened, was that my mom and dad got divorced when I was like 13, then actually 14. And my mom remarried in September of that same year.
Oh my.
And the man that she married was significantly younger than she was. So there was a whole lot of shame on my part because everybody in the town knew. I lived in a very small town. Everybody knew about it. Everybody knew this guy was much, much younger. They questioned the relationship, and he was closer to my age than my mother's age. So there was all this, people had opinions. And so that made it difficult. And then there was the idea that I found out later. I did not know this then. My dad never spoke ill of my mother. Never. But there was a time.
At least not to you.
Not to me. I'm sure you're talking ill about her.
But that's the point, right? You shouldn't be talking ill about him, to the child.
Yeah, but it was years later, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, actually, that I really sat down with my dad and I said, I know things. And he's like, okay. He never told me any of the stuff that was happening with my mom. And he finally told me about how she wouldn't accept he would call and she wouldn't let me speak to him. And she was keeping him from me and I didn't even know it. She wasn't manipulating me to have feelings negatively about him. She just was not allowing him to participate in my life. And I was in like I was supposed to accept my stepdad as my dad.
And call him dad?
I didn't have to call him dad. I did not have to do that. She didn't push that. But it was if I, even after, sorry, even after even after I was older and out of the house, as long as I was around my mom and my stepdad, I felt like I was doing something wrong if I was spending time with my dad. So there was this feeling of, even though it wasn't said, it was like this underlying feeling that I was being disloyal and betraying my mother by being with my dad.
Gotcha. Well, and those are some strong alienation tactics. I know that Eric's mother did similar things. But beyond emotional, there's also a behavioral component that kids go through with divorce. This might include things that they used to like, they don't like as much anymore, or things that, okay, school. You said you were good at school, but a lot of times there's an academic decline because they can't focus, because they're worried about their emotional well-being is off the charts in a negative way. Well, then that comes out in actions. Maybe they're angry, and so they get, into fights, again at school or with other people. People that used to be good pals, now they're angry and they're fighting with everybody. You mentioned appetite. Appetite is, again, a behavioral change in how you used to eat, because you saw that you felt that you had to look a certain way, be a certain way. I mean, these are behavioral changes because mom and dad are fighting. And I don't know that a lot of times when mom and dad are fighting, they can pay attention to anything other than their own needs. And would that fit with you? Does that sound true to your experiences?
I think I went into good girl mode. I went into good girl mode. It was, I am going to be the good girl. I am going to get the good grades. I am going to earn my keep. I'm going to earn my love. Thinking of it from that perspective of feeling like you're not going to be loved anymore, I think my mom had this kind of way of having like a conditional love kind of thing. So I think I had grown up feeling like I had to earn it. So instead of falling behind in school, I threw myself into school. Instead of, I would do all the things and I would be the good girl, because that's what got you attention. That's what got you love. And so I went completely the other way.
And I bet you, and so it was such a shift that nobody noticed that your behavior was a direct result of an unintended consequence. That suddenly you're doing well. Oh, what a good thing. But not understanding the need that you were trying to find. Looking for, I love that song about, I forget what it's titled, but, looking for love in all the wrong places is one of the lyric lines. And I have heard that many, many times in talking with kids, and a lot of the literature and research dealing with when mom and dad are going through divorce. And it makes me frustrated. I get it. You're mad. You're angry. As a parent, you're mad and angry at the spouse. And I will say that I was there for a small amount of time. I was there, and I wasn't thinking about Eric as much as I should have. But it lasted, a couple of months, and I started realizing what I was doing was putting him in the middle, and I stopped. But his mother never did. And it sounds like your mother never did either. Some of the physical symptoms that I've read and heard and reported to me, especially amongst little kids, includes bedwetting. Because of fear factor, because of some of their emotional concerns, they like I say, they will wet the bed. They tend to get sick more, have headaches, stomach aches, a lot of times to avoid conflict, to avoid having to make mom or dad angry or upset or disappointed. Um, Anything like that?
Well, I mean, I had chronic headaches, but I don't know that I did it to get out of anything or avoid conflict. I think I just, like I said, I think I just went into the good girl mode, and that worked for me.
Well, sometimes stress can cause people to have headaches or stomach aches, stress and anxiety. So the higher the stress, the higher the anxiety, the greater the chances of having some of these physiological or physical symptoms. So
It sounds to me like, as a person who has no training whatsoever on the brain or those activities, but has been able to watch certain things over the years, not about Eileen, but it sounds like she's moving into a place of, at that time, of like, this is what I can control. Mm-hmm. Right, I can control my grades. I can control this, and hopefully, what those things that I can control is going to earn me the love and respect from my mom. But you hear all kinds of things. You see students that are having trouble. See kids, and they're checked out, or they're moving towards drugs, or they're doing activities that they shouldn't be doing. Right. Being reclusive into their rooms, or just moving into areas where maybe that's what they feel like they can control, right? Mm-hmm. And so they do some more harmful things, whereas Eileen did some things that actually benefited her. But it could go either way, and I kind of think of like the student or the child who's completely consumed by this, in the same way that you might think about drunk driving, right? Like your brain can only do like one thing at a time. And, there's been studies that suggest that this multitasking thing that we all think we can do, we can't. We don't have those Intel chips, right? Like, so you really can't do multiple things at a time. And certainly, even if you can, right, like you can rub your stomach and pat your head or whatever, like that's two things, but you're still focused on those varied motions, but you can't do those multiple things, and so you focus on what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so students or children will end up focusing on that pain, right? And that argument they heard this morning, or that thing. And so then they get to school, or they get to whatever they're doing, and they can't focus on that. And so it has that negative effect on them. Whereas Eileen did the opposite, right? She would internalize it, but then move it towards, I'm going to do something that I can control. I think that's what we're saying here. And it had a positive effect for her in that way, but then, probably a whole string of other negative effects, because you're kind of ignoring the other thing.
And you're not talking about it. You're not processing it. I mean, I know that we tried to put Eric, or we didn't try. We did put Eric into therapy, but turned out she was a quack. So it didn't actually work. But that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about in regards to when mom and dad get divorced. Please think about children, is the lasting long-term effects. If mom and dad, I get you're going to be angry, but put that anger to the side. Sherry's ex-husband and her get along perfectly now. They move past the hurt, they move past the anger, they put the kids first, and here we are, crying out loud, what is it? So, more than a decade later, they get along real well, to the point that her son and her ex have a lawn mowing service, and now he comes over and he mows my yard. It's kind of weird.
It's working out for you.
Yeah. But I mean, they do get along, and they put the best interest of the children first. When you can do that, both of my stepkids are fans. They're getting along, and they're moving ahead in life. And they had the bumps in the road early on, but here we are. They're out of high school, they're out of college, and they're making their way in the world, and they are becoming the adults that you want your children to become. Because when you can't, that's when the struggles really begin. And they can't move forward, and they have a hard time with relationships, with, interpersonal relationships, not just with a potential lover or future spouse, but also just coworkers and developing strong friendships. It's really tough for them. The issues, with their mental health, their stress and depression, anxiety that never got addressed when they were younger. Well, they continue to feed and manifest. And Eileen, I applaud you because you're an exception. You've been able to go through a horrific event, be alienated from your father, and yet you and Scott were able to, before marriage, day one, said, look, what happened to us is not going to happen because of us. And I applaud because, a lot of marriages, it's work. I mean, the idea that marriage is not work is a falsehood.
Oh, don't get the idea that it wasn't work.
Oh, I know what I'm saying,
that.
but what I'm saying is that you guys invested the work and you made that clear.
Eileen had to work really hard to put up with me.
So do I. But hey, it works. Look, I'm number one. No, but it's worth it. It's worth the work. Anything worth the darn requires work.
Yes.
And a good, healthy marriage can generate so much more.
Yes.
And, and I get it. It takes two to get married, but it only takes one to get divorced. And if you wind up, I did not want to get divorced. I did not go into my marriage thinking that I would be divorced. Yet she decided that she didn't want to be married to me anymore. And of course, with her mental health issues that I did not know, at least at the time, or didn't want to pay attention to even beforehand, it came back to, she made these decisions. The divorce was led by her, directed by her. At the end of the day, I'm glad. I'm a much happier, healthier person in every way that you can be happy and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a horrible experience. And I gotta say, I think if mom and dad can understand that we need to put children first, that it's okay that, it sucks that you're getting divorced, but if you put kids first, the divorce goes actually a lot easier. And the kids come out better on the other end. So, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know that when mom and dad go through divorce, they really consider the impact that their decision has on their children, which was the whole point of this long-winded conversation that we had, and having Eileen in here and share her personal experiences. Thank you very much. I'm sure that was not very easy. So thank you for sharing your insight and your experiences. Would you be willing to come back for more at another point in time?
Sure.
Okay, well,
all right.
I guess that's dinner on you. Anyway.
Well, we'll let our listeners go, right?
Yes. I apologize. This went a lot longer than normal, so please forgive me. But until next time, take care. Love your kids. Give them a hug. I'm Rod.
I'm Scott.